I am 55 years old now. I still remember the afternoon when my brother began speaking to someone who was not there. That memory refuses to fade. Every sound from that day still sits in my mind as if it happened yesterday. The light coming through the kitchen window. The old clock ticking on the wall. My brother sitting cross-legged on the floor, talking to empty air. At the time, he was only 7 years old. Our parents thought it was harmless. Children invent invisible friends all the time. That was what they believed. I knew something felt wrong long before anyone else noticed. Because my brother was not pretending. He was listening. I watched him tilt his head as if someone was speaking quietly beside him. Then he nodded. Then he answered. There was a pause between sentences. Like a real conversation. I remember asking him who he was talking to. He turned toward me slowly. His expression looked annoyed. Like I had interrupted someone important. He said the name very casually. Daniel. I asked where Daniel was. My brother pointed at the empty chair near the window. I laughed at the time. Children do strange things. But then my brother said something that made the laughter stop. He said Daniel used to live here. Those words stayed in the air longer than they should have. Our family had moved into that house only 2 months earlier. Nobody had spoken about the previous owners. Nobody had mentioned children. Still my brother spoke with strange confidence. He said Daniel had lived in the house a long time ago. He said Daniel knew every room. Even the ones we had not seen yet. That last part confused me. The house was not very large. There were no hidden rooms. Or so I believed at the time. My brother continued talking to the empty chair. He asked Daniel questions. Then he repeated the answers. Sometimes he laughed. Sometimes he frowned. Once he looked frightened. I began listening carefully. That was when I heard something disturbing. Daniel did not like me. My brother suddenly turned his head toward me again. His voice sounded colder. Daniel says you should leave the room. I asked why. My brother shrugged. Daniel says you ask too many questions. That was the moment when something inside me began to feel uneasy. Children invent friendly companions. They invent heroes. They invent animals. They do not invent strangers who dislike specific people. That night at dinner, my brother mentioned Daniel again. Our parents smiled. They treated it like harmless imagination. My father joked that Daniel should help with chores. My mother asked if Daniel wanted dessert. My brother did not laugh. He looked serious. Daniel does not eat with us. My father chuckled. Where does Daniel eat then? My brother answered quietly. Daniel says he cannot leave the house. The room became strangely quiet after that. My parents still brushed it aside. I did not. Later that night, I walked past my brother's bedroom. His door was slightly open. I heard whispering. My brother was talking again. Slow. Careful. Like someone sharing secrets. I stood outside listening. Then my brother said something that made my stomach twist. Daniel says tomorrow something bad will happen. There was a pause. Then my brother asked another question. When? Another pause. Then he answered in a whisper. Tomorrow morning. I opened the door and stepped inside. My brother looked irritated again. I asked him what Daniel meant. My brother only shrugged. Daniel does not want me to tell you. I told him imaginary friends cannot predict things. My brother looked directly at the empty space beside his bed. Then he looked back at me. Daniel says you will believe him soon. I barely slept that night. Those words replayed in my mind again and again. Morning arrived quietly. Nothing unusual happened at first. The sun rose. Our parents prepared breakfast. My brother sat silently staring at the window. He kept glancing at the empty chair across from him. Then the phone rang. My father answered. I watched his face slowly lose color. He lowered himself into the chair slowly. My mother asked what happened. His voice sounded hollow. Your uncle was in an accident this morning. The room became silent. Nobody moved. My brother looked toward the empty chair again. Then he nodded slowly, like someone had confirmed something. I stared at him. He whispered something I will never forget. Daniel said this was only the beginning. And at that moment I realized something that terrified me. My brother was not imagining a friend. Someone else was in that house with us. And Daniel already knew what was coming next. After the accident call that morning, something inside the house shifted. No one said it out loud. Yet the silence between us carried weight. My mother moved slowly around the kitchen. My father stared at the table for a long time. My brother kept glancing toward the empty chair. I tried convincing myself everything had a normal explanation. Children say strange things. Predictions sometimes match events by coincidence. That was what I repeated to myself. Still, one detail refused to settle. My brother had not seemed surprised. That afternoon, I followed him quietly through the hallway. He walked into the living room and sat on the floor again. He placed 2 toy cars in front of him. Then he pushed one toward the empty couch. Your turn, Daniel. I stood behind the doorway watching. My brother waited several seconds. Then he nodded slowly. That is cheating. You moved twice. Another pause. Fine. I will start again. I stepped into the room. My brother did not even look startled. He only sighed as if my presence ruined something. Daniel says you should stop spying. My skin prickled. I asked him how Daniel knew I was there. My brother rolled his eyes. Daniel sees everything inside the house. That answer made the room feel colder. I tried a different question. What does Daniel look like? My brother began describing him without hesitation. Daniel is taller than me. He has brown hair. He wears an old sweater with red stripes. My brother paused again. Then he added another detail. Daniel says he used to sleep in the room at the end of the hallway. That confused me. The room at the end of the hallway was storage. Nobody slept there. My brother noticed my reaction. Daniel says the room looked different before the wall was closed. My heart skipped. What wall? My brother pointed toward the hallway. That wall. The one near the staircase. I stared at him. There was nothing unusual about that wall. Just old paint and a picture frame. I laughed nervously. You are making things up. My brother frowned. Daniel says you never listen. He says there used to be another door there. That sentence stayed in my head for hours. Later that evening, curiosity pulled me toward the hallway. I stood in front of the wall my brother had mentioned. It looked normal. Still, something bothered me. The paint shade seemed slightly uneven, like a section had been repaired years ago. I pressed my hand against it. Solid. Nothing strange. Yet my mind refused to relax. That night, I heard voices again. My brother was awake. I moved quietly down the hallway. The bedroom door was half open. My brother sat on the floor again. He was whispering. No, Daniel. That will scare them. Pause. I know they should know. Pause. Not yet. My breath slowed. I leaned closer to the door. Then my brother asked a question that made my stomach tighten. Daniel, how did you die? The room went quiet. Even my brother did not speak for several seconds. Then he nodded slowly. His voice sounded softer. Oh, another pause. That is why you cannot leave the house. My chest felt tight. I stepped into the room. What did he say? My brother looked annoyed again. Daniel says you are not ready to hear it. I walked closer. Tell me anyway. My brother shook his head. Daniel does not trust you. I tried keeping my voice calm. Why not? My brother looked toward the empty corner again. He listened carefully. Then he answered. Daniel says someone in this house helped him disappear. Those words hung in the air like smoke. I felt heat rise in my chest. That is impossible. My brother shrugged. Daniel remembers everything. My mind raced. Our family had moved into the house only weeks earlier. We had never lived here before. There was no connection. Yet my brother spoke with absolute certainty. I tried another approach. If Daniel lived here, where are his parents? My brother listened again. Then he answered quietly. Daniel says they left without him. A cold feeling spread through my body. What do you mean without him? My brother stared directly into my eyes. Daniel says they never found him. The room became silent. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. I whispered another question. When did this happen? My brother turned toward the empty corner again. Then he said something that made my heart pound harder. Daniel says it happened a long time ago, before we were born. I tried to laugh again. Children invent strange stories. Still the unease would not disappear. Then my brother added one more sentence. Daniel says the police searched this house once. I stared at him. Why would police search the house? My brother listened again. His expression slowly changed. His eyes widened. Then he whispered, because Daniel never left it. A chill ran through my spine. I asked the question slowly. Where is Daniel now? My brother pointed directly at the floor beneath us. Right here. Then he leaned closer to the ground, as if listening carefully. Another pause passed. My brother looked up again. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Daniel says the wall in the basement is hiding something. And if we open it, everyone will understand what really happened in this house. Sleep refused to come that night. The sentence my brother whispered kept circling inside my head. Daniel says the wall in the basement is hiding something. Basements already carry a certain heaviness. Ours felt worse after hearing that. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I sat at the breakfast table, staring into my coffee while my parents spoke about ordinary things. Weather, groceries, work. My brother stayed quiet. Every few seconds, he glanced toward the empty chair again. I followed his eyes without meaning. Nothing sat there. Still, the feeling of being watched would not leave. After breakfast, my brother approached me. Daniel wants to show you something. My chest tightened. What? My brother turned toward the hallway. The basement. I should have refused. Yet curiosity dragged me forward. We walked down the narrow staircase together. The air grew cooler with each step. The basement smelled like dust and old wood. Boxes were stacked along the walls. Old furniture covered in sheets. Nothing unusual. I turned toward my brother. See, nothing here. My brother did not respond. He stood still, listening. Then he walked toward the far corner of the basement. Daniel says it is behind this wall. I looked at the spot he pointed to. A plain concrete wall. No cracks. No openings. Nothing unusual. I felt irritation rising. There is nothing there. My brother knelt and pressed his ear against the concrete. He stayed like that for several seconds. Then his eyes widened. He looked back at me. Daniel says you should listen. I hesitated. Part of me felt foolish. Another part felt uneasy. Still, I knelt beside him. I placed my ear against the cold surface. At first I heard nothing. Then something faint reached me. A dull sound. Very soft. Like a distant knock. My breath stopped. I pulled back quickly. That was impossible. My brother looked at me with quiet satisfaction. Daniel told you. My mind rushed through explanations. Old pipes. Water pressure. Air inside the walls. Anything but what my brother believed. Still, my pulse had started racing. I stood up quickly. Enough of this. But my brother shook his head. Daniel says we must show them. Show who? Mom and Dad. I hesitated again. Calling our parents to listen to mysterious sounds in the basement would make us look ridiculous. Yet the knocking returned. 3 slow taps. Even standing several feet away, I heard them clearly. My stomach twisted. We walked upstairs together. My brother immediately told our parents. There is something inside the basement wall. My father laughed. Probably pipes. My brother shook his head. Daniel says it is not pipes. My father sighed. Who is Daniel again? My brother answered calmly. The boy who lived here before us. My parents exchanged a glance. The same silent concern passed between them. My mother crouched beside my brother. Sweetheart, imaginary friends are normal. My brother looked annoyed. Daniel is not imaginary. My father rubbed his forehead. All right, let us see this wall. We returned to the basement together. My father walked to the corner my brother had pointed at. He knocked on the concrete with his fist. Solid. See. My brother walked forward again. Daniel says listen carefully. My father rolled his eyes but leaned closer. Silence filled the basement. Then the knocking came again. 3 dull taps. My father froze. My mother stared at the wall. Nobody spoke. The sound came once more. 3 taps. My father stepped back slowly. That cannot be pipes. The next afternoon, he borrowed tools from a neighbor. A hammer. A chisel. My mother looked uneasy. Are you sure about this? My father shrugged. Something is making that noise. We might as well find out what it is. My brother watched quietly from the stairs. Every few minutes he glanced toward the empty space beside him, as if someone stood there observing everything. My father struck the wall. Concrete cracked slowly. Dust filled the air. Another hit. Another crack. Soon a section of the wall began breaking apart. Behind the concrete appeared wooden boards. Old ones. Much older than the house repairs around them. My father pried one loose. Cold air drifted out from the opening. The smell that followed made my stomach turn. Stale. Rotten. Like something sealed away for decades. My mother stepped back. What is that smell? My father widened the hole. More boards fell away. Behind them a narrow, dark space appeared. Not a pipe tunnel. Not wiring. A small hidden room. Nobody spoke. My father grabbed a flashlight and shined it inside. Dust covered everything. An old mattress sat in the corner. Several toys lay scattered across the floor. A small wooden chair. Children's drawings on the walls. My brother stepped forward slowly. Daniel says this was his room. My parents stared at him. Then my father moved the flashlight across the floor. The beam landed on something near the mattress. A photograph. He picked it up carefully. Dust covered the glass frame. My father wiped it with his sleeve. Then he froze. My mother leaned closer. Her face lost color. I stepped forward. The photograph showed a young boy. 7 or 8 years old. Brown hair. Wearing an old sweater with red stripes. My chest tightened. That description sounded painfully familiar. My brother looked at the photograph. Then he looked toward the empty space beside him. He nodded slowly. That is him. Daniel says you found his room. Silence filled the basement. Then my father whispered something none of us expected. I remember this boy. My head turned toward him. What? My father stared at the photograph again. His voice had become quiet. This boy went missing many years ago. Police searched the neighborhood for weeks. My mother spoke slowly. What was his name? My father answered without looking away from the picture. Daniel. Daniel Mercer. My brother nodded again. Daniel says he told you. The basement suddenly felt colder. I stared at the photograph in my father's hands. A missing child. Hidden room. Knocking behind the wall. Then my brother spoke again. His voice barely above a whisper. Daniel says the police never searched the right place. My father looked up slowly. What place? My brother pointed toward the floor of the hidden room. Right there. Daniel says that is where they buried him. Nobody spoke for a long moment after my brother said those words. Right there. Daniel says that is where they buried him. The basement air suddenly felt too heavy to breathe. My father lowered the photograph slowly. My mother stepped backward until her shoulder touched the staircase railing. I kept staring at the floor inside the hidden room. It looked ordinary. Dust. Old wooden boards. Nothing that suggested anything buried underneath. Yet the unease inside my chest continued growing. My father cleared his throat. That is enough imagination for one day. He tried to sound calm. The effort did not succeed. My brother looked irritated again. Daniel says you already know it is true. My father ignored the comment. Everyone upstairs. Now, we left the basement together. The door closed behind us with a dull thud. That night nobody mentioned Daniel. Dinner passed in quiet tension. My father avoided looking at my brother. My mother forced small conversations about school and chores. My brother remained silent. Occasionally he tilted his head slightly, listening. Every time that happened my stomach tightened. Later that evening I walked into the living room. My father sat alone with the photograph we found in the basement. He had been staring at it for several minutes. I sat across from him. You really remember that boy? My father nodded slowly. The entire town talked about it when it happened. He disappeared without a trace. Police searched for weeks. Volunteers looked everywhere. Forest fields. Rivers. They never found anything. I hesitated. Did they search this house? My father rubbed his temples. Yes, but not thoroughly. His family moved away shortly after. The house changed owners several times. Eventually people stopped talking about it. My chest tightened. Daniel Mercer. Missing for decades. Now suddenly connected to our house again. And somehow my brother knew his name before we ever saw that photograph. My father finally placed the picture on the table. Your brother must have heard something somewhere. Children pick up stories. I nodded. That explanation sounded reasonable. Still one problem remained. My brother described Daniel before we found the photograph. Every detail matched. The hair, the sweater, even the age. Later that night, I passed my brother's bedroom again. The same whispering voice reached the hallway. I stopped outside the door. My brother sounded nervous this time. No, Daniel. You promised you would not tell them yet. Pause. I know they need to know. Another pause. My brother sighed. Fine. I will try. I pushed the door open. He looked up immediately. Daniel says you should stop listening at doors. My patience had started wearing thin. Tell me something. My brother crossed his arms. What? How do you know Daniel's last name? My brother glanced toward the empty corner again. Then he answered. Daniel told me. I walked closer. How would he know his own last name if he is just an imaginary friend? My brother frowned. Because he is not imaginary. Then he added quietly. Daniel says the police wrote his name many times. My skin prickled. I asked another question. What else did the police write? My brother listened again. His expression slowly darkened. They wrote missing child. The room felt colder. Then he added something that made my pulse jump. Daniel says they also wrote suspect. I felt confusion rising. Suspect. Yes. Someone the police thought might know what happened. My breathing slowed. Who? My brother listened carefully again. Then he shook his head. Daniel says he does not want to say yet. Why not? My brother answered immediately. Because that person is still alive. Silence filled the room. I felt an uneasy pressure behind my chest. Whoever Daniel believed was responsible had never been caught. And now my brother believed that person still existed somewhere. I tried another question. Why does Daniel talk to you? My brother looked toward the empty corner again. He listened longer this time. Then he answered quietly. Daniel says I am the only one who can hear him. Why you? Another pause. Then my brother looked directly at me. Daniel says because you were there. The word struck me harder than I expected. What do you mean? My brother shrugged. Daniel says you saw him once. I stared at him. That was impossible. I had never heard of Daniel Mercer until yesterday. Yet something inside my memory shifted uneasily. A faint sensation, like a dream, almost remembered. I pushed the feeling away. You are confusing things. My brother looked unconvinced. Daniel says memories can hide. My patience snapped. Enough. Stop blaming invisible people for old stories. My brother remained calm. Daniel says you will remember soon. The certainty in his voice unsettled me more than anything else. The next morning, our quiet life disappeared. 2 police officers arrived at our door. Someone had reported the hidden room in the basement. News travels quickly in small towns. My father invited them inside. They inspected the basement carefully. Photographs were taken. Measurements recorded. The officers spoke in low voices near the hidden room. Eventually, one of them walked upstairs. His face looked serious. We will need to investigate further. My father nodded slowly. Of course. Before leaving, the officer asked one final question. Who found the hidden room? My father pointed toward my brother. He did. The officer looked surprised. Your son. My brother spoke calmly. Daniel showed me. The officer raised an eyebrow. Daniel. My brother nodded. Daniel Mercer. The officer's expression changed immediately. How do you know that name? My brother answered simply. Daniel told me. The officer stared at him for several seconds. Then he exchanged a quiet glance with his partner. They returned to the basement again. For the next 2 hours, we heard tools scraping against the floor, wood breaking, dust falling. Eventually, the officers came upstairs again. Their expressions had turned grim. My father stood up quickly. Did you find something? One officer nodded slowly. Yes. Human remains. My mother covered her mouth. Silence swallowed the room. Then the officer asked the question that changed everything. Who told your son the body was buried under that floor? My brother answered without hesitation. Daniel did. The officer's voice lowered. That child disappeared 30 years ago. Nobody knew where he was buried. My brother looked toward the empty corner again. Daniel says he waited a very long time for someone to listen. The officer studied my brother carefully. Then he asked another question. Did Daniel say anything else? My brother listened again. His expression slowly shifted. Yes. What? My brother spoke softly. Daniel says the person who buried him once lived in this house. The officer leaned forward. Do you know who that person is? My brother nodded slowly. Daniel knows. The officer's eyes narrowed. Then tell us. My brother looked toward the empty space again. He listened carefully. A long pause passed. Then he spoke the sentence that made my father freeze. Daniel says that person is still part of this family. The room became silent after my brother spoke those words. Daniel says that person is still part of this family. The police officer did not move for several seconds. My father stood perfectly still. My mother slowly lowered herself into a chair as if her legs had suddenly lost strength. I felt my heartbeat rising inside my ears. The officer looked directly at my brother. What do you mean by that? My brother did not answer immediately. He tilted his head again, listening. The habit had become so normal for him that it now frightened me. Then he spoke. Daniel says he remembers the face. The officer leaned closer. Whose face? My brother pointed slowly across the room, toward my father. Daniel says it was him. My mother gasped. My father stepped backward as if someone had pushed him. That is ridiculous. His voice came out louder than expected. The officer raised a hand calmly. Sir, please relax. My father shook his head. This is nonsense. A child talking about ghosts cannot accuse anyone of murder. My brother remained calm. Daniel says he is not a ghost. The officer turned toward my brother again. Then what is he? My brother answered quietly. Someone who never got to leave. Those words made the air inside the house feel colder. The officer glanced toward his partner. Then he asked my brother another question. Did Daniel tell you anything about how he died? My brother listened again. His expression darkened slightly. Yes. What did he say? My brother answered slowly. Daniel says someone pushed him. My father slammed his hand on the table. That is enough. The officer kept his voice steady. Sir, no one is accusing you yet. My father laughed bitterly. Your face says otherwise. The officer remained calm. We are simply asking questions. My father pointed toward my brother. A 7-year-old child claims a ghost told him, I killed someone 30 years ago. Do you realize how absurd that sounds? The officer nodded slightly. Yes. Still, the location of the remains was accurate. My father opened his mouth, but no words came out. That detail had shaken everyone, even me. The officers eventually left the house. They said forensic teams would return later. After the door closed, the silence inside the living room became unbearable. My mother spoke first. "This is a misunderstanding." My father nodded quickly. "Of course it is." He looked toward my brother. "You must stop telling these stories." My brother looked confused. "I am not telling stories. Daniel is." My father rubbed his face. "Daniel is not real." My brother turned toward the empty corner again. Then he spoke quietly. "Daniel says you are lying." My father stood up, so suddenly his chair tipped backward. "Enough." His voice echoed through the room. My brother flinched. I had never seen my father lose control like that. He pointed toward the hallway. "Go to your room. Now." My brother stood slowly. Before leaving, he glanced toward the empty space beside the door. Then he whispered something under his breath. The sentence barely reached my ears. "Daniel says the truth always comes out." The next several days became unbearable. Police vehicles appeared outside the house almost daily. Investigators searched the basement again. The hidden room was photographed from every angle. News reporters began asking questions around town. The name Daniel Mercer returned to conversations that had been silent for decades. Inside the house, tension grew worse. My father barely spoke. My mother moved around quietly with constant worry in her eyes. My brother continued talking to Daniel. Every night. Every morning. Sometimes the conversations sounded peaceful. Other times they sounded like arguments. One evening I walked past his room again. His voice sounded angry. "No, Daniel. You promised not to tell them that." Pause. "I know they deserve the truth." Another pause. My brother sighed. "Fine. But they will hate me." My stomach tightened. I opened the door. My brother looked exhausted. "What is Daniel telling you now?" My brother hesitated. Then he answered slowly. "Daniel says more people will start asking questions soon." I sat on the edge of the bed. "About what?" My brother glanced toward the empty chair again. "About what really happened that night." The sentence caught my attention. "What night?" My brother looked confused. "The night Daniel died." I stared at him. "You keep talking like you saw it." My brother answered quietly. "Daniel says someone in this house did." I felt irritation building. "Your ghost friend keeps blaming our family." My brother shook his head. "Daniel is not blaming everyone. Only one person." My chest tightened. "Who?" My brother listened again. Then he spoke softly. "The same person the police suspected long ago." My mind raced. Police suspected someone years earlier. Who could that be? I asked carefully. "Did Daniel say the name?" My brother hesitated longer this time. Then he nodded. "Yes." My heart pounded. "Tell me." My brother looked toward the empty corner again. Another silent conversation passed. Then he whispered, "Daniel says he will prove it soon." I felt anger rising. "You cannot accuse people without proof." My brother answered calmly. "Daniel says the proof is already buried." "Where?" My brother pointed toward the backyard. "Under the old garden." The sentence made my stomach twist again. The next morning, police returned. This time they carried shovels. Investigators began digging near the old garden behind our house. Neighbors gathered along the fence watching. Reporters arrived soon after. I stood beside my father on the porch. Neither of us spoke. Then the sound of metal striking something hard reached us. One of the officers called out to the others. They pulled something from the soil. A rusted metal box. My father's face lost color instantly. The box was opened carefully. Inside were several items sealed in plastic. Old clothing. A small red striped sweater, and a child's broken wristwatch. The same sweater my brother described when he first spoke about Daniel. The officer looked toward the house. Then he walked slowly toward my father. "Sir, do you recognize any of these items?" My father stared at the sweater. His hands trembled slightly. "No." His voice sounded hollow. The officer studied him carefully. Then he asked another question. "Were you living here 30 years ago?" My father hesitated. "Only for a second. But I noticed it." "Yes." The officer nodded slowly. "That makes you the last person connected to the house when Daniel Mercer disappeared." The weight of that sentence settled over everyone standing there. Then my brother stepped onto the porch behind us. He looked toward the garden, then toward the empty space beside him. "Daniel says they are getting closer." "Closer to what?" My brother answered quietly. "The truth about who buried him." The moment the red striped sweater came out of that rusted box, the entire investigation changed direction. I saw it in the police officers' eyes. Before that discovery, they were cautious. After it, they were certain something inside our family held the answers. The yard slowly emptied as reporters finished recording their footage. The police stayed. One officer approached my father again. "Sir, We need you to come to the station for questioning. My father stood very still. Is this an arrest? The officer shook his head. Not yet. The words not yet echoed in my mind like a warning. My mother stepped forward immediately. My husband did nothing wrong. The officer spoke calmly. We just need clarification about your time living here 30 years ago. My father looked toward the backyard where the box had been found. Then he nodded slowly. Fine. 2 hours later, he left with the officers. The house felt strangely hollow after the police car disappeared down the street. My mother sat in the living room gripping a cup of tea that had long gone cold. My brother sat on the floor again, talking. The quiet whispering continued. Daniel says the police will not understand everything. I turned toward him sharply. What does that mean? My brother looked up at me. Daniel says the truth is more complicated. My patience was wearing thin. Everything about this situation had become too strange. Daniel says this. Daniel says that. Every answer came from someone none of us could see. I leaned closer to him. Then tell Daniel to explain everything now. My brother tilted his head again, listening. A long pause passed. Then he spoke softly. Daniel says some memories are buried deeper than bodies. The sentence unsettled me more than I expected. I tried laughing it off. You speak like a detective in a movie. My brother did not smile. Daniel says you should stop pretending you do not remember. The word struck something inside me. A faint discomfort, like a memory brushing against the edge of my mind. I pushed the feeling away. Remember what? My brother looked confused. You really do not remember. Remember what? My brother listened again. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. Daniel says you saw him that night. My heart skipped. That was impossible. I would remember something like that. My brother kept staring at me. Daniel says you were older than him. Old enough to understand what happened. A faint pressure began building inside my chest. I stood up quickly. Stop repeating nonsense. My brother shrugged. Daniel says the truth does not disappear just because people stop talking about it. The conversation ended there. Yet the sentence stayed with me all afternoon. That night my father returned from the police station. He looked exhausted. My mother rushed toward him. What happened? My father sat down slowly. They asked many questions. About when we lived here. About Daniel Mercer. My mother spoke quietly. Did they accuse you? My father shook his head. Not directly, but I could see what they were thinking. Silence settled between them. Then my father noticed my brother watching him. He sighed. You need to stop telling police officers ghost stories. My brother responded calmly. Daniel says you already told them the truth. My father frowned. What truth? My brother answered without hesitation. That you knew Daniel. My father froze. The silence stretched across the room. My mother turned slowly toward him. You told them that. My father rubbed his forehead. Yes. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the Mercer family. Their son played outside often. My brother tilted his head again, listening. Then he spoke quietly. Daniel says you are forgetting something. My father's voice hardened. Enough. My brother continued. Daniel says you saw him the night he disappeared. My father stood up again. I told you to stop. My brother remained calm. Daniel says you were not alone. My chest tightened again. My father stared at my brother with growing anger. Where do you get these ideas? My brother pointed toward the empty chair beside him. From Daniel. My father walked toward the hallway. The conversation is over. But my brother spoke again before he left the room. Daniel says the police will come back tomorrow. My father stopped walking. Why? My brother answered quietly. Because they will find another witness. The next morning proved him right. A police car arrived again. 2 officers stepped inside. This time they asked to speak with my brother directly. My mother looked uneasy. He is only 7. The officer nodded. We understand. Still, he seems to know things about this case nobody else knows. My brother sat calmly in the living room chair. The officer crouched beside him. Did Daniel tell you anything else? My brother listened again. Then he answered. Yes. What did he say? My brother spoke slowly. Daniel says the police were looking at the wrong person all those years ago. The officer leaned forward. Who were they looking at? My brother answered. My father. The officer nodded. Yes. He was questioned once. My brother continued. Daniel says they were wrong. The officer raised an eyebrow. Wrong. Yes. Then who was responsible? My brother listened carefully again. A long pause passed. Then his eyes slowly shifted toward me. My stomach tightened instantly. The officer followed his gaze. My brother whispered the sentence that made the room freeze. Daniel says the person who buried him was standing in this house the night he died. The officer looked back at my brother. Do you know who that person was? My brother nodded slowly. Yes. The officer asked the question carefully. Who? My brother pointed toward the doorway. Toward me. Daniel says it was them. The world around me seemed to tilt. My mother gasped. My father turned sharply. The officer stared at me in stunned silence. And at that exact moment, I felt something move inside my memory. Something dark. Something I had buried for 30 years. Something that was beginning to wake up. When my brother pointed at me, the room felt like it had tilted sideways. For a moment, nobody spoke. The police officer slowly turned toward me. My father looked shocked. My mother covered her mouth. And my brother remained perfectly calm. Daniel says they remember. My voice came out rough. Remember what? The officer stood up slowly. We are not making accusations yet. His words sounded careful. Too careful. Still, every pair of eyes in the room had turned toward me. I felt heat rising under my skin. This is ridiculous. I barely remember anything from 30 years ago. My brother tilted his head again, listening. Then he answered softly. Daniel says you remember more than you think. I looked away from him. The pressure inside my head had started growing. A strange discomfort, like something pushing against the walls of my memory. The officer spoke again. Were you living in this house when Daniel Mercer disappeared? I nodded slowly. Yes. How old were you? 9. The officer wrote something in a small notebook. Do you remember playing with Daniel? I hesitated. The answer should have been simple. Yes or no. Instead, something strange happened. A faint image flashed through my mind. 2 children running through a backyard. A red striped sweater. A broken toy car. The image vanished as quickly as it appeared. My chest tightened. I shook my head. I do not remember him. My brother spoke quietly from across the room. Daniel says that is not true. My patience snapped. Stop saying that. My brother looked hurt for the first time. I am only repeating what Daniel says. The officer studied my face carefully. Sometimes memories from childhood can fade. Still, certain events leave strong impressions. I forced a laugh. A missing child would be unforgettable. Exactly. The officer's voice carried a weight I did not like. My brother whispered again. Daniel says the night he died was not supposed to happen. The sentence landed strangely inside my chest. I felt that pressure again. A memory trying to push through. My father interrupted. This conversation is going nowhere. My son did nothing. The officer nodded calmly. We understand. Still, we need to ask these questions. My brother looked toward the empty corner again. Then he spoke softly. Daniel says the truth is hiding in a memory. I rubbed my temples. The headache had started growing. Stop talking about memories. My brother continued. Daniel says you were angry that day. The pressure inside my head grew stronger. A flash. 2 children arguing. A toy taken away. A shove. The image disappeared again. My breathing quickened. I stood up. I need some air. I walked outside before anyone could stop me. The cool air hit my face. Still the pressure remained. Fragments of something long forgotten moved inside my mind. A backyard. A wooden fence. A boy shouting. Then silence. I pressed my hands against my temples. This was impossible. If something terrible had happened, I would remember it clearly. Yet the images kept trying to surface. The back door opened behind me. The officer stepped outside. He kept a respectful distance. Sometimes memories return slowly. I shook my head. There is nothing to remember. The officer studied me quietly. Your brother seems convinced otherwise. My voice hardened. My brother believes a ghost is speaking to him. The officer nodded. Yes. Still, he knew where Daniel's remains were buried. That fact refused to disappear. The silence between us stretched for several seconds. Then the officer asked another question. Do you remember the garden? The word struck me strangely. Garden. A new image flickered through my mind. Fresh dirt. A small hole. A broken watch glinting in sunlight. My heart began beating faster. I pushed the image away immediately. No. The officer watched my reaction carefully. Your father mentioned you spent time playing near that area as a child. Children play everywhere. That does not mean anything. The officer nodded slowly. Perhaps. Still, we may ask you to come to the station later today. My stomach tightened. Why? Just routine questioning. Routine. The words sounded harmless. Yet the look in his eyes told a different story. I nodded reluctantly. Fine. The officer walked back inside the house. I remained in the yard staring at the ground near the old garden. That was where police had found the rusted box. Where the red-striped sweater had been hidden. Where Daniel's belongings had stayed buried for 30 years. A faint voice drifted from inside the house. My brother speaking again. Daniel says the memories are waking up. I close my eyes. Another image flashed across my mind. A child falling. A cry of pain. Then the sound of dirt hitting wood. My eyes opened suddenly. My breathing had become shallow. Something terrible had happened here long ago. Something I had forced myself to forget. The back door creaked again. My brother stepped outside slowly. He stood beside me. Daniel says you are starting to remember. I turned toward him sharply. Tell Daniel to stop. My brother shook his head. Daniel says he waited 30 years for the truth. I stared at the ground again. The soil looked ordinary. Yet my mind kept showing me flashes of another time. Another day. Another moment. Then my brother whispered something that made my blood run cold. Daniel says he forgives you. My head snapped toward him. Forgives me for what? My brother looked toward the empty space beside him. Then he answered in a quiet voice. For what happened the night you pushed him? The sentence struck like a hammer. Another memory exploded inside my mind. 2 children arguing beside the fence. A shove. A fall against a rock. The sound of something breaking. Then silence. My breathing stopped. I whispered the only word that came to mind. No. But my brother spoke again. Daniel says it was an accident. My knees felt weak. Accident. The word echoed through my mind. Another image appeared. A small body lying still. Panic rising in my chest. And a terrified child beginning to dig into the dirt. The moment that memory surfaced, my entire body felt numb. For 30 years my mind had hidden it. Now it had begun forcing its way back. A boy lying on the ground. The sound of his head striking stone. The silence afterward. My brother stood beside me watching carefully. Daniel says you remember now. My voice trembled. Stop saying his name. My brother remained calm. Daniel says he never wanted to scare you. I turned away. The backyard suddenly looked unfamiliar. The fence. The old tree. The patch of soil where the rusted box had been found. Everything around me belonged to that day. A day my mind had buried. My brother continued quietly. Daniel says you did not mean to hurt him. The sentence hit me like a heavy weight. My breathing became uneven. I remember arguing. That much had returned clearly. Daniel had taken something from me. A toy car. My favorite one. I had demanded it back. He refused. Children argue over small things. But anger grows quickly at that age. I shoved him. Harder than I intended. He stumbled backward. His foot caught the edge of a stone. Then he fell. The memory became sharper. The dull crack when his head hit the rock. The sudden stillness afterward. My hands began shaking. My brother watched silently. Daniel says you thought he was dead. My voice came out barely above a whisper. He was not moving. My brother listened again. Then he spoke. Daniel says he was still alive. The words froze me. Alive. That detail had never appeared in my memory before. My chest tightened painfully. I remember panicking. Running back to the house. Looking for help. But nobody was home. Fear filled every corner of my mind. Children do not think clearly in moments like that. I returned to the yard. Daniel was still lying there. Still not moving. My brother spoke again. Daniel says you were scared of getting in trouble. The shame inside my chest grew heavier. Yes, that was the truth. I was terrified. Terrified of punishment. Terrified of what my parents would say. So I made a choice. A terrible one. My voice cracked. I buried him. My brother nodded slowly. Daniel says you were crying the entire time. The memory returned piece by piece. A small shovel. Loose soil near the garden. The broken wristwatch slipping from Daniel's arm. My heart pounded painfully. I covered him with dirt. Then I hid his belongings inside that metal box. I thought the secret would disappear forever. Children believe many foolish things. My brother spoke softly. Daniel says he waited for someone to remember. My throat tightened. 30 years. 30 years of silence. 30 years of believing the memory had vanished. But Daniel had remained. Somewhere. Watching. Waiting. The back door opened suddenly. My father stepped outside. He looked between us with growing confusion. What is happening? I turned slowly toward him. My voice felt hollow. I remember. My father frowned. Remember what? The truth. His expression hardened. What truth? My brother answered calmly. Daniel says they remember the night he died. My father looked from him to me. My chest felt tight. I pushed the words out slowly. I pushed him. The silence that followed felt endless. My father stared at me. You were joking. I shook my head. I pushed him during an argument. He fell. Hit his head. And I panicked. My father stepped backward. No. I buried him in the garden. My father's face turned pale. My mother appeared in the doorway behind him. What are you saying? The words felt heavier each time I spoke them. Daniel Mercer did not disappear. I hit him. My mother's hands began shaking. You were only 9. I nodded slowly. Yes. My father ran his hand through his hair. Why did you never tell anyone? I looked at the ground. Because I convinced myself it was a nightmare. A bad dream. A mistake that my mind slowly erased. My brother spoke quietly. Daniel says memories do not stay buried forever. My father stared at the garden. Then he whispered something that surprised me. I suspected something years ago. I looked up quickly. What? My father's voice sounded distant. The day Daniel disappeared, I noticed fresh dirt near the fence. But when I asked you about it, you looked terrified. I thought another child might have done something. Still, police never found anything. The silence between us felt unbearable. Then the front doorbell rang. A police officer stepped inside the yard. We need to speak with you. My father nodded slowly. I stepped forward before he could respond. You do not need to ask questions anymore. The officer looked confused. Why not? My voice sounded steadier than I expected. Because I remember everything now. The officer studied my face carefully. Everything. I nodded. I pushed Daniel Mercer. He fell and hit his head. I buried him in the garden. The officer's expression turned serious immediately. You are confessing to causing the death of a child. Yes. My mother began crying quietly behind me. My father stared at the ground. The officer took a slow breath. We will need you to come to the station. I nodded again. I understand. Then my brother spoke one more time. Daniel says he is glad you told the truth. I looked at him. For the first time since this nightmare began, his expression looked peaceful. Daniel waited a very long time for this moment. The officer placed handcuffs gently around my wrists. As he guided me toward the police car, my brother whispered one final sentence. Daniel says he is standing beside you. I turned my head slowly. For a brief second, I thought I saw a small figure near the fence. A boy wearing a red striped sweater. Watching quietly. Then he was gone. The courtroom felt colder than any place I had ever entered. Perhaps it was the silence. Perhaps it was the weight of every eye watching me as I walked in wearing handcuffs. Or perhaps it was the knowledge that a secret buried for 30 years had now been placed in front of the entire world. Reporters filled the back rows. Their cameras waited like silent witnesses. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then the proceedings began. The prosecutor stood first. Their voice carried confidence. 30 years ago, a young boy named Daniel Mercer vanished without explanation. His family spent years searching for answers. Law enforcement searched fields, rivers, and forests. Nothing was found. The child simply disappeared. A pause filled the courtroom. Until now. The prosecutor turned toward me. Because the truth was buried in a backyard for 3 decades. My stomach tightened. They continued speaking. The defendant admitted pushing Daniel Mercer during an argument. The fall caused a fatal head injury. Instead of seeking help, the defendant buried the body and concealed evidence. The room remained silent. Every word felt heavier than the last. Then the prosecutor added something else. This was not a planned act of violence. It began as a childish argument. Yet what followed turned a tragic accident into a crime hidden for 30 years. My lawyer stood next. Their voice sounded calmer. My client was 9 years old at the time of the incident. A frightened child does not understand the consequences of panic. This case is not about a calculated crime. It is about fear, confusion, and a memory that the mind buried for decades. The judge listened carefully. Then the witnesses began. Police officers described the investigation. The hidden room. The remains beneath the basement floor. The rusted metal box in the garden. Each piece of evidence painted the same story. Daniel Mercer never left that house. Next came testimony about my confession. The officer who arrested me repeated my words carefully. The courtroom listened in complete silence. Then the prosecutor called the most unusual witness of all. My younger brother. Gasps moved through the room. A child connected to a ghost story had become central to a murder case. My brother walked calmly to the witness stand. He looked far younger than the weight of this situation deserved. The prosecutor knelt slightly to speak at his level. You told police that someone named Daniel spoke to you. My brother nodded. Yes. The courtroom shifted with quiet murmurs. The prosecutor continued. Can you tell us what Daniel said? My brother tilted his head slightly. For a moment, I recognized the familiar expression. He was listening again. Then he answered. Daniel said the truth was buried in the garden. The prosecutor glanced at the judge before continuing. Did Daniel say who buried him? My brother nodded slowly. Yes. Who? My brother pointed toward me. They did. The prosecutor allowed the silence to stretch across the room. Your Honor, the location of the remains matched the information this child gave police before any excavation began. My lawyer stood immediately. Objection. The judge nodded. Sustained. The jury will disregard supernatural explanations. My brother looked confused. I am not explaining anything supernatural. The courtroom grew quiet again. The prosecutor asked another question. Why did Daniel talk to you? My brother answered calmly. Because nobody else listened. The prosecutor stepped back. No further questions. My lawyer approached next. Their tone softened. You love your family, correct? My brother nodded. Yes. Did Daniel ever say the defendant meant to kill him? My brother shook his head immediately. No. Daniel said it was an accident. A ripple moved through the courtroom. My lawyer continued. Then why did Daniel wait so long to reveal the truth? My brother looked toward the empty space beside the witness stand. He listened quietly. Then he answered. Daniel said memories wake up when they are ready. The courtroom remained silent. Even the judge seemed unsure how to react. My lawyer returned to their seat. The judge called a short recess. As people began leaving their seats, my brother stepped down from the stand. He walked past me slowly. For a moment, he stopped beside the defense table. Daniel says you did the right thing. I looked at him carefully. Did Daniel ever hate me? My brother listened again. Then he shook his head. Daniel said you were just a scared child. The words felt heavier than any accusation. A scared child. That was all I had been. Yet fear had created 30 years of silence. As the courtroom emptied, I noticed something strange. My brother was staring toward the far corner of the room. His eyes followed something invisible moving slowly along the wall. Then he smiled slightly. When he reached me again, he whispered one more sentence. Daniel says he will speak one more time before this trial ends. My chest tightened. Speak about what? My brother looked toward the empty corner again. Then he answered softly. Daniel says the whole story has not been told yet. The sentence sent a chill through my spine. Because I had already confessed everything I remembered. Yet Daniel seemed certain that another truth was still waiting to surface. The next day in court carried a tension heavier than the one before. Something about my brother's last sentence refused to leave my mind. Daniel says the whole story has not been told yet. I had confessed everything. At least everything I remembered. Still that sentence lingered like a shadow. The judge called the courtroom to order again. More witnesses followed. Forensic specialists explained the injuries found on Daniel's remains. The fall had caused severe trauma to the skull. One expert spoke carefully. The injury is consistent with striking a hard object during a fall. My lawyer nodded slightly. That matched my confession. An accidental shove. A fall. A terrible chain of events. Yet the prosecutor stood again with another piece of evidence. Your Honor, the medical report includes an additional observation. The courtroom leaned forward slightly. The expert continued. There is a second injury on the skull. The room went completely silent. The prosecutor spoke slowly. Can you explain that injury? The expert nodded. This wound occurred after the first impact. My chest tightened. After? Yes. The second fracture appears to have been caused by a blunt object. The courtroom erupted with quiet murmurs. My lawyer stood quickly. Are you saying the child was struck again after the fall? The expert answered calmly. Yes. The judge called for silence. My heart pounded. Another injury. That detail had never appeared in my memory. The prosecutor continued questioning. Could that second injury have been caused accidentally? The expert shook their head. The angle and force suggest deliberate contact. The sentence struck the room like thunder. Deliberate. My mind began racing. I remembered the fall clearly now. The argument. The shove. The rock. But I had no memory of striking him again. None. The prosecutor turned slowly toward the jury. The defendant confessed to pushing Daniel Mercer. That explains the first injury. Yet the medical evidence reveals something else happened afterward. Every eye moved toward me. Something that turned an accident into something far darker. My lawyer objected immediately. Speculation. The judge nodded. Sustained. Still the damage had already settled into the room. Another injury. Another moment I did not remember. The trial paused for lunch shortly afterward. Inside the holding room my thoughts raced endlessly. I replayed the memory again and again. The shove. The fall. Daniel lying motionless. I remembered crying. Panicking. Digging the hole. But nothing about striking him again. Nothing. The door opened. My lawyer stepped inside. Their expression looked serious. The second injury complicates things. I nodded slowly. I never touched him again. My lawyer studied my face carefully. You truly do not remember anything else? No, not even fragments. My lawyer sighed quietly. Memories from childhood can be unreliable. That was not comforting. The courtroom session resumed an hour later. More testimony followed. Then the prosecutor called my brother again. A murmur spread through the audience. The judge allowed it reluctantly. My brother stepped onto the stand calmly. The prosecutor asked one direct question. Did Daniel ever say anything about what happened after he fell? My brother tilted his head, listening again. Then he nodded slowly. Yes. The courtroom leaned forward again. What did he say? My brother answered quietly. Daniel said he woke up for a moment. A chill ran through my body. Woke up? Yes. My brother continued. Daniel said he saw someone standing over him. The prosecutor glanced toward me. Who? My brother listened again. Then he answered. Not them. The entire courtroom froze. Not them. The prosecutor frowned. If it was not the defendant, then who? My brother looked toward the empty space beside him again. Daniel says it was someone older. A murmur moved through the room. Older. My lawyer stood quickly. Who exactly? My brother hesitated. Daniel says that person was angry. The prosecutor pressed further. Did Daniel say the name? My brother remained silent. He kept listening. The pause stretched longer than any other. Then he slowly raised his hand and pointed across the courtroom. Not at me. At the defense table. At my father. Gasps spread across the room. My father froze in his seat. My brother spoke softly. Daniel says he woke up after the fall. He saw them arguing with my father. The prosecutor leaned forward. Arguing about what? My brother answered quietly. Daniel said my father was angry because the police might come. My mind spun wildly. That was impossible. My father stood up suddenly. This is absurd. The judge slammed the gavel. Order in the court. My brother continued speaking calmly. Daniel says my father picked up the rock. The room fell silent again. My father shook his head violently. That never happened. My brother looked toward the empty corner again. Then he whispered the sentence that changed everything. Daniel says the second injury happened because my father did not want him waking up again. The prosecutor turned slowly toward the jury. The medical report confirms a second strike. My father's face turned pale. My entire world felt like it was collapsing again, because the memory inside my mind had never shown that moment. I only remembered running away, panicking, digging the hole. But my brother's voice echoed through the courtroom one last time. Daniel says the truth has two parts. The first part was the accident. The second part was the silence that followed. And that silence belonged to someone else. The courtroom exploded into noise after my brother pointed at my father. Gasps spread across the audience. Reporters leaned forward. Even the judge looked stunned. My father remained standing beside the defense table, his face pale and rigid. The judge struck the gavel several times. Order in the court. Slowly the room quieted again. The prosecutor spoke first. Your Honor, this testimony aligns with the forensic evidence of a second blow. My lawyer stood immediately. This is the statement of a child describing a ghost story. The judge raised a hand. The jury will decide how much weight to give this testimony. Then the judge turned toward my father. Sir, please remain seated unless called to testify. My father lowered himself slowly into his chair. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. The trial continued. Yet the tension had shifted completely. The story no longer centered only on me. Now another possibility hung over the room. The prosecutor called the forensic expert back to the stand. You stated the second injury required significant force. Yes. Could a frightened 9-year-old deliver that level of force? The experts shook their heads slowly. It would be unlikely. The courtroom murmured again. My lawyer objected. Speculation. The judge allowed the answer to remain. My thoughts spun endlessly. I remembered pushing Daniel. I remembered burying him. But the moment after the fall had always remained empty. My father's voice suddenly cut through the courtroom. I want to speak. Everyone turned toward him. The judge studied him carefully. You understand you may be questioned. My father nodded slowly. Yes. He walked to the witness stand with slow steps. The room became silent again. The prosecutor spoke calmly. Did you know Daniel Mercer? My father nodded. Yes. His family lived nearby. Did you see him on the day he disappeared? My father hesitated. Then he answered quietly. Yes. My chest tightened. The prosecutor continued. Where did you see him? My father took a deep breath. In the backyard. The silence inside the courtroom deepened. My father continued speaking. I returned home earlier than expected that afternoon. I saw two children arguing near the garden. One of them pushed the other. My eyes closed briefly. The memory matched my own. My father's voice grew heavier. The boy fell and hit the rock. Then what happened? My father looked toward me. You ran inside. My stomach twisted. That part was true. The prosecutor leaned forward. What did you do next? My father paused for several seconds. When I reached Daniel, he was breathing. The courtroom remained perfectly still. He was alive. My hands trembled. Alive. The prosecutor spoke again. Then how did he die? My father swallowed slowly. I panicked. Those words sounded painfully familiar. I realized police would investigate. They would ask questions. My father's voice shook. My child would be blamed. My mother covered her mouth. My father continued. Daniel opened his eyes for a moment. He tried to speak. My father looked down at his hands. And I made the worst decision of my life. The courtroom felt frozen in place. The prosecutor asked quietly, What did you do? My father's voice came out hollow. I picked up the rock. And I struck him. The room erupted again. Gasps. Shocked whispers. Even the judge looked stunned. My father continued speaking through the noise. I told myself it would protect my child. That the accident would never be discovered. My chest felt tight. I remembered digging the hole afterward. My father's voice returned again. When my child came back outside, Daniel was already dead. My father looked directly at me. You believe the fall killed him. I let you believe that. The silence that followed felt unbearable. The prosecutor spoke carefully. So the second injury came from you? Yes. My father nodded slowly. I caused it. The judge called for quiet again. My father's voice softened. I carried that secret for 30 years. Every day, I wondered if the truth would return. Today it finally did. My eyes burned. The story I believed my entire life had just changed. I had caused the accident. But my father had ended Daniel's life. The prosecutor asked one final question. Why did you never confess earlier? My father looked toward my brother. Because I believed the truth was buried forever. My brother spoke quietly from the gallery. Daniel says secrets always return. My father lowered his head. Yes, he was right. The judge ended the session shortly afterward. Court would resume the following morning. As officers escorted my father and me from the courtroom, my brother walked beside us briefly. He looked toward the empty space beside him again. Then he whispered softly. Daniel says he waited long enough. I asked him one final question. Is Daniel still here? My brother listened carefully. Then he smiled faintly. Daniel says he can finally leave. And for the first time since this story began, my brother stopped looking toward the empty space beside him. The final day in court arrived with a silence that felt different from the others. The tension that once filled the room had shifted into something heavier. Truth has that effect. Once it appears, everything changes around it. My father and I sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, both of us wearing the same expression. Exhaustion. 30 years of silence had ended in a single confession. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then the final statements began. The prosecutor spoke carefully. This case began as a mystery about a missing child. Over time, the truth revealed two tragic decisions made in one afternoon. A child pushed another child during an argument. Fear followed. Panic spread. Then an adult chose to silence a witness forever. The words settled heavily over the courtroom. My lawyer stood next. Their voice carried a quieter tone. A frightened 9-year-old believed they caused a death. That belief shaped an entire life filled with guilt and confusion. Meanwhile, a parent made a desperate choice believing it would protect their child. They paused. Both decisions were born from fear. And fear has consequences that echo across decades. The judge listened carefully. Then the verdict phase began. The court recognized that the original push was an accident committed by a child too young to fully understand the consequences. But the burial of the body had obstructed justice for many years. My sentence was reduced because of my age at the time of the event and my full confession. My father faced a far heavier charge. The second strike. The act that turned an accident into a death. The courtroom remained silent as the judge spoke. When the session ended, reporters rushed outside to deliver their stories. But inside the courtroom, something quieter happened. My brother approached me slowly. For months, he had spoken to someone nobody else could see. Now his eyes looked different. Calmer. I asked the question that had been sitting inside my mind for days. Is Daniel still here? My brother tilted his head. Slightly. The familiar motion returned one last time. He listened carefully. Then he smiled. Daniel says goodbye. My chest tightened. That is all he said. Yes. My brother nodded. Daniel says he waited 30 years for someone to tell the truth. Then what? My brother looked toward the far corner of the courtroom. For a moment I followed his gaze. Nothing stood there. Yet my brother continued watching the empty space. Daniel says he is not angry anymore. My voice felt quiet. Does he forgive me? My brother listened again. Then he answered. Daniel says you were a scared child. The same words he had said before. Yet hearing them again felt different. He says the real prison was the silence you carried. My hands trembled slightly. 30 years of guilt. 30 years of nightmares. 30 years of believing I had taken a life. The weight had shaped every decision I made. My brother spoke again. Daniel says you can stop carrying it now. I closed my eyes. For the first time in decades, my mind felt quiet. When I opened them again, my brother was still staring toward that empty corner. Then something changed. His expression softened. Then he nodded once. A quiet acknowledgement. Daniel left. Just like that. No dramatic moment. No strange sound. Just a quiet ending. My brother looked back at me. He is gone. Those words marked the end of a story that had haunted our family for decades. Years passed after the trial. My life changed in ways I never expected. The truth forced its way into daylight. And once that happens, there is no hiding from it again. Still, one thought remains with me. Daniel Mercer waited 30 years for someone to listen. 30 years for someone to remember. And when the truth finally appeared, the voice that guided it belonged to a child speaking to someone nobody else could see. Sometimes people ask me whether Daniel was truly there. Whether a spirit waited in that house all those years. Or whether guilt simply found a voice through my brother. I still do not know the answer. But I do know one thing. Truth has a strange way of finding its way back to the surface. No matter how deeply someone tries to bury it. And sometimes the smallest voice becomes the one that finally reveals it. Now before you leave, I want to ask you something. If you were in my place that day as a frightened child, would you have told the truth immediately? Or would fear have buried the secret the same way it buried Daniel? Think about that for a moment. And if stories like this keep you thinking long after the video ends, make sure you subscribe and stay with the channel. Because the next story waiting here might leave you questioning reality even more than this one did. And trust me, some secrets wait far longer than 30 years before someone finally listens.